Welcome back, you filthy exiles. So, it's been a really interesting league, and I thought I would do a recap video. Just basically run through how things have went, and or maybe not so much a recap video, but we're going to focus on the 5 big builds that made their way through this league, and that a lot of people tended to play. They went into meta builds. And right at the end of the video, also I'll cover off on the builds that I tried that I really didn't like, and I didn't really cover too much in the end game on this. I think the other thing with this video is to give you some ideas of I guess how we're traveling into the next league, which I think gets announced very shortly, and yeah, give you some ideas of I guess things that you could potentially start theory crafting now to get ready for the 3.14 league, which will be just around the corner. Anyway, let's get into into a recap of 5 big builds, and I'll link through these particular builds that at least I'm looking at right now, and their creators and the POBs and everything else in between. So you'll see that in the description, and yeah. Anyway, let's run through. Okay, so the first build that I'm going to actually have on this list is the Blade Vortex Assassin. Now, a lot of people discredited this build as, from the patch notes initially, saying that, the Assassin's been nerfed and everything else in between. That actually didn't come to fruition. Right now, currently, it's one of the most played builds in the league, with 17% of Assassin builds, and Assassins being 14% of the current league meta that's right now in play. And obviously, that's fluctuated throughout. Essentially, this is still one of the most popular builds, one of the easiest to spec up, and maxing out crit along with the gratuitous amounts of damage with minimal investment in early league is one of the most enticing factors of this build. Now, bearing in mind, I've put Pheonix's build up because it's simple. The cluster dueling is very basic, and quite frankly, the items, while his is min and maxed, and has 2 void batteries, can be sort of tailored across the the spectrum. Now, he does use precursor emblems, which are really expensive, and I'm not saying that this is the league starter build itself, but this is something that you can consider for next league. As I said at the very start of the league, it was very unlikely that they were ever going to effectively nerf Blade Vortex, and in fact, I was right about that assumption. And yeah, so I would say definitely one of the higher end builds in the league. There are definitely occultist variants of this. There are obviously chieftain, fire BV variants of this, and essentially variations of this throughout every scion builds, self curse builds, all sorts of jazz. But one of the most versatile and one of the most builds played in this particular league for 3.13. Okay, the next build that we're going to feature in this this curation is the Cyclone build. Now, tried and true, league on league, in almost every ARPG, whether it be Warpath and other RPGs it's called, or what was it called in Diablo, Whirlwind in Diablo and whatnot. Cyclone style builds are pretty much 100% guaranteed to be good in every game that they're in. Except Walson, because quite frankly, Walson sucks. But anyway, what we've got here is a build from Jaamon. Now, the statistics on this build in particular for this league were around 12% out of all primary skills were played as Cyclone, and now that variated between champions, slayers, and other various means. Now, in particular, the build that I've selected here, that's from Jaamon, and go and check out his channel, because he's it looks like he's getting into the whole YouTube thing, and he has a completely holistic build guide that's set out for a Cyclone Slayer, and in fact, it's got all sorts of variations between different budget levels and all sorts of jazz, medium budgets, swords, axe, high budgets with axes, everything that you need to sort of fully understand how Cyclone works. Now, the biggest thing about Cyclone is being able to find a generator for Berserk, and also it uses your totems, being your War Chief totem and your Ancestral, Ancestral War Chief and War Chieftain totems, anyway, whatever it's called. to basically buff up your damage. Now, there are different things, like I think it was ironwood and all sorts of different nodes in the tree that you can unlock. And in this case, yes, he does have Panopticon, which is a huge buffer for totem damage, which then synergizes with the build. Now, this one gets up to 55 million damage, but I will note with Cyclone builds, it is completely predicated on the sword. And I played a Cyclone build this league, and now he's showing a Terminus S there, and that's pretty much the key opening sword that you're going to start playing this build with. You're going to get high damage on that. But things like Rustlife coils and all that sort of stuff aren't cheap for, first up in leagues. And the biggest thing is the DPS stacking on the sword. If you don't have a good sword, this build is only realistically as good as the two-handed sword or the exquisite blade that you're going to run on it, or potentially the axe, depending on if you go axe variation. But Cyclone is incredibly powerful, and when I say there are limiters on this build in that respect of, you know, running T16s and survivability and whatnot really is indicative of the sword you have, and on Slayers that indicates the amount of leech based on the damage that you stack. You will not have a huge life pool on this sort of build. You know, in the video he's min-maxed his gear and paid the absolute price, but if you're going lower budget, life is a bit of a commodity that you can't necessarily afford. But that being said, incredibly powerful build, reliable league on league. There are a ton of guides. I've just picked one, and it'll all be in the description. And this one in particular has a very deep dive through all the different budget variations that you'll need from league start all the way through, and it's very comprehensive, and that's why I'm going to recommend it in this video. Okay, so the next build that I'm going to recommend here from a recap of this league is actually Carrion Golems. Now, the one you can see is the video that I uploaded, and I've done a bit of a run through in this and a bit of a deep dive and put together my own tree and flog the hell out of the damage and explain how to get that damage in quite a relatively easy way. Now, the benefits of this build are simply high levels of survivability, high levels of sustainability, and the entire reason I played Carrion Golems was because I got lazy and I didn't want to play any other builds. As you can see, it just absolutely spanks pretty much anything at the end game. Now, the big thing here is obviously early league, this is a little bit harder to gear, but once you pretty much get 2 clay shapers, you're good to go. And then you spec into low life, running a Prism Guardian, and then just start aura stacking, and that buffs up your Carrion Golems. Now, you're gonna only have 4 Golems running around, and they'll do all the damage that you need them to do. You buff it up with your Animate Guardian, you run a Kingmaker on your Animate Guardian, and Ephemeral Garb, and then yeah, you get some good specters, including an Arena Master, and Bob's your uncle. This build is a no-brainer. There's 1,000 build guides out there. Mine is just a really, I guess, comprehensive guide to start for somebody who doesn't really understand Carrion Golems, and or if you've ever seen it and you don't believe that it's achievable, it certainly is. But yeah, I would say definitely one of my top 5 builds for recapping for this league. Also on top of that, 7% of players currently are still rolling out with Carrion Golems. It's still it's the 3rd highest used skill in this league right now, but at various points of this league has been the most popular skill that's been used. Probably through mid-league, and if you were to go through the actual week-by-week, I guess, analytics in the POE.ninja build section, you would probably find many weeks this was the top build to play. Anyway, on to number 4. Okay, so the 4th build that we're going to mention here is actually going to be CoC Nova. Now, this has 5% of the player base currently playing this in the PoE League. Now, throughout the league, this travels through multiple different variations of whether it's Assassin, and now can actually be played as the Elementalist since the patch changes in this league. And as you can see, this is the Elementalist at play. Now, the survivability that the Elementalist has is almost second to nothing when it comes to playing this build, even comparable to the Assassin. Now, the Assassin has a lot more crit scaling. The Elementalist, though, has a lot more survivability. And you can also abuse the Liege of the Primordial and the Elemancer nodes in this particular build, which basically, as you know, you have Golems that's going to buff up your damage, and then there's more survivability if you so chose to, against various different types of elements. Now, this particular build that I'm showing here is actually from a creator, of which I'm not even going to try and repeat their name because it's crazy, but the link's in the description. And basically, in this particular build, it's essentially showing a Chaos Inoculation setup that works incredibly well. As you can see on screen, he's clearing all content that needs to be cleared with such a build. It's got good clear speed, it's got crazy AoE, and that's further procced up by Heart of Destruction, which is one of the new nodes in the Elementalist tree on the Witch. And yeah, as an overall, from a gearing perspective, you know, you're only running one Cosbury Malice. Now, taking into account you're probably not going to have a Bottled Faith first up, and even a lot of players don't have Bottled Faith, and you can reduce that, and it's really not going to chunk your damage down too much. It's still going to be an OP-ass build, and is actually quite a good League Starter build, even if we were talking about from a League Start perspective. But at this point, you can flesh out and theory craft what you could do with it for next League, and get some ideas from this build and then go from there. Now, the creator in particular is only a newer content creator from what I can see here, so feel free to pop by his channel, and he's actually got a link which gives you a budget version for an assassin as well. So there's a few different ways that you can go at this, but give this build a go, see what you think, test it out in standard before you get into 3.14, and see if you like it, and then just go from there. Anyway, on to the last build. Okay, so the last build that we'll look at here that was played for about 5% of the league as at the 18th of March right now is the Toxic Rain skill or build. Now, in this particular one that I'm citing here is from AsmodeusClips, and this is actually the trick. This is actually the Pathfinder, I believe. It is the Pathfinder. I'll just double check on the screen. It is the Ranger. Sorry, Ranger Pathfinder. Yep. Now you can't play this effectively with the Trickster. It's just as good. You get a lot of dot. It just really depends on whether you want to play a Pathfinder or a Trickster. At the end of the day, they both do dot. Now, the one thing I will say is just be careful with his POB. Overlapping pods, from my understanding, overlap 5 times and not 7, and that has an impact of about 1.5 to 1.8 million DPS. And if you don't have wither totems, then you won't have wither stacks. So wither stacks does, you know, another duplication of damage as well. If you don't have it, and you won't have that when you clear packs, more so you'll drop wither totems when you're taking down bosses, then you'll have wither stacks. So just be mindful when you use the POB. But aside from that, his POB looks incredibly realistic, and that's really good. Which is one of the reasons why I'm recommending his POB. Now, what are the advantages of this particular build? Well, it's dot scaling. You are going to use dodge mechanics, and dodge mechanics can be a bit shitty from time to time, but if you flask it up and you continually run up dodge and evasion, you should be fine. Now, he does use a Carcass Jack. I would actually say use a Kintsugi in this case. It'll use an Asenath's Chant. That's where you can see all the other abilities dropping when he's dropping his Toxic Rain, and also a Maloney's Mechanism, and both of those things are not cheap at the start of leagues. Now, any other gearing here is basically looking at 1+ to gem level or plus to gem level on your bow, and the bow is quite easy to get. It's not actually a very hard bow to get. But yeah, this would be build number 5 that I would recommend looking at even for next league as a league starter. It's reliable league on league, and you can't really go wrong with it. It's quite a good build, and the link will be in the description. Okay, so all other things aside, I sort of decided to compile some thoughts about builds I did try during the league that didn't necessarily work, so I didn't publish a lot of content around it. So the first being Bleed Bow Gladiator. Now, I played this as my league starter. I didn't like this build. It was cool to league start with and efficient to level up with, but what I've found is as soon as I got to mapping and started progressing mapping, I hit a plateau until you can get the bow that you need, and crafting that bow is incredibly expensive, and even getting Lionized gear, in particular the jewel that you need, is a bit of a shit show at the start of the league. And what a lot of people most likely found, because the stats obviously dropped off throughout the league, is that it wasn't the best league starter to go with, and I think that was from the direction of where the patch notes sort of drove us, and that's why in particular I decided to play it, and I regret that decision now. Maybe not so much, and now I understand the build a lot better, but I wouldn't recommend it as a league starter again. Now, BV Chieftain, that's another one, is good, but getting the Asnet's gloves is a bit of a pain in the ass and expensive earlier in the league. That's really the only way that you can make it pop off. The other problem with BV Chieftain is building the survivability of that build is really, really difficult, and I found that just an absolute pain in the ass in the end, and so I decided to respec. The third build that I ended up trying that I didn't actually put any content up on was the Power Siphon and Kinetic Blast Assassin. Now, it's a fantastic build if you can get it to work and you have the patience and the currency to do it. There's definitely a lot of players that do. It's got one of the highest, at least Kinetic Blast and Power Siphon are in the top 10 metrics right now, at least in the league, for builds that are played by the absolute 1%. If you're not a 1% player in that upper echelon, and you know, that's talking from, you know, people who are a bit more elitist in the game, it's really just not a build that you should walk into league and play. It's very hard to balance, it's very hard to gear early on. You really need to have a very good understanding of crafting, and it's a very time consuming and currency driven build at the end of the day. I wouldn't recommend it as a league starter. I would recommend it as maybe a second build. Now, I didn't play any mine builds this league, though I pretty much would recommend across the board Pyroclast mines. Next league I think I'm going to play. And pretty much any other mine build is going to be great. GC mines are always a fantastic option. And you just run it on the Saboteur class and it's really good. Anyway, I hope this video's given you a bit of an idea of builds to sort of start looking at for next league, and a bit of a recap of builds that have sort of passed through this league and have been quite good. And obviously I haven't covered off on Bladefall Blade Blast. We all know that a lot of people played that in the early days of the league, but it is a very clunky mechanic, though it is overpowered and will most likely get nerfed next league. Anyway, until next time, like and sub. If you didn't like this video and you thought it was shit, give me a dislike, and I'll try and upload a little bit more moving into the next league. And yeah, bye.